Imagine hiking through a mist-covered mountain forest in northern Laos. Like, the terrain is treacherous.
Right, because of all the unexploded landmines.
Exactly. It's heavily littered with cluster bombs from the Vietnam War, so every step is a calculated risk. But you push through the dense foliage, and suddenly you stumble into a clearing.
Oh, and sitting right in front of you is a solid 2-ton cup carved entirely out of stone.
Right. Now imagine looking inside that massive stone vessel and finding this chaotic jumble of human teeth. And then, like half buried in the dirt, you spot a tiny glass bead that was manufactured over 4,000 miles away in Mesopotamia.
It completely shatters your mental model of the ancient world. I mean, we usually expect remote communities to be, well, isolated.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect international trade in a remote jungle.
Exactly. But a discovery like this forces us to confront a past that was vastly more interconnected, more complex, and frankly, more mysterious than we ever gave it credit for.
Well, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are traveling to the enigmatic plain of jars in the remote highlands of Southeast Asia.
It's such a fascinating region.
It really is. And we are pulling our insights directly from a brand new, peer-reviewed research paper published in the journal Antiquity. It's dated May 19th, 2026. We're also looking at official press releases and commentary from leading anthropologists.
Right, and our mission today is to explore how the recent, incredibly dangerous excavation of just one exceptionally massive stone vessel is completely rewriting our understanding of ancient burial rites.
The one they call the death jar, right?
Yeah, formerly dubbed Jar 1.
Yeah.
We are going to look at how it shakes up established historical timelines and, how it maps out these forgotten global trade routes that span continents.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by massive archaeological mysteries that just seem like, I don't know, a pile of disconnected rocks, this deep dive is going to give you the precise details that make the whole picture snap into focus.
We really need to start by setting the physical scene.
Right.
We are on the Xieng Khouang Plateau in northern Laos. And when we say plain of jars, we are not talking about a few dozen clay pots sitting in a museum.
Oh, far from it. It's staggering to even visualize. We are looking at a massive landscape phenomenon.
Yeah, there are hundreds, possibly thousands of carved stone vessels scattered across more than 120 known sites in this upland region.
And these things are huge.
Massive. Some of these monolithic jars are up to 3 meters tall and weigh several tons. They are carved from solid rock, like sandstone, granite, conglomerate, and they just dominate the hillsides.
Which is wild, and for nearly a century, their purpose has been a massive question mark. I mean, French archaeologist Madeleine Kalani investigated them back in the 1930s.
Yes, she was a pioneer there.
And I read that local legends at the time claimed these giant vessels were used for brewing massive batches of rice wine, like to celebrate military victories by a race of giants.
Which is a fantastic story.
It sounds like an incredible party, honestly. But early scholars guessed they were just oversized silos for storing food or water to survive the dry season.
Let's spread the utilitarian theory. Kalani suspected they were tied to burials, but getting definitive proof was practically impossible.
Because of the modern history, right? The danger factor.
Exactly. Since the 1970s, expeditions into this specific region have been incredibly dangerous. The Xieng Khouang Plateau was heavily bombed.
Just absolutely saturated with cluster munitions.
Yeah. For decades, archaeologists simply couldn't access many of these sites safely without risking their lives. It effectively froze the archaeological record in time.
But recent clearance efforts by bomb disposal teams have finally opened up safe corridors. Which brings us to our sources today.
Yes. The team, co-led by Dr. Nicholas Skopal and Suya Bounsehip.
Right. They hiked out to a highly remote, newly cleared location known as Site 75. It's about 70 kilometers northeast of the main town. And there, they excavated Jar 1.
And this thing is an absolute beast.
It really is. It's a solid conglomerate rock jar standing 1.3 meters high and over 2 meters wide. But here is what I just don't understand. If you are an ancient person, why go through the immense physical agony of hauling a 2-ton stone bowl through the mountains?
It's a great question.
Like, how do you even move something like that without modern machinery? It seems so unnecessary if you just want to store rice wine.
Well, the logistics of creating and moving these jars require an astonishing level of social organization.
Yeah.
You can't just carve a 2-ton conglomerate jar out of the dirt.
Right, because conglomerate is basically just rocks glued together, isn't it?
Exactly. It's a sedimentary rock made of various pebbles and stones cemented together, which means it is incredibly difficult to carve without the whole thing just crumbling apart.
Oh, wow. So they had to be super careful.
Yeah. They had to locate suitable rock outcrops, which in some cases were miles away from the final resting sites. They would rough-hewn the stone at the quarry to reduce the weight.
And then what? Just drag it?
Pretty much. They likely used a system of wooden rollers, sledges, and teams of cattle or hundreds of people dragging these monuments up steep elevation gradients.
That is an astronomical investment of calories and time, which means whatever they were using Jar 1 for, it wasn't casual. It was deeply, fundamentally important to their society.
Absolutely.
But surely there are other jars closer to civilization. Why is the excavation of this specific, incredibly remote Jar 1 such a breakthrough?
What's fascinating here is that the isolation is exactly what makes it so valuable. Many of the more accessible jar sites on the plateau have been extensively looted.
Oh, that makes sense. Or disturbed by farming.
Right, or damaged by those wartime bombings. But Jar 1, because it was so hard to reach, remained remarkably pristine. It was found mostly intact with its original sediment deposits still sealed inside.
Like a time capsule.
Exactly. That sediment allows researchers to finally apply modern forensic science to the contents rather than just guessing based on the exterior stone.
Okay, so they finally dig into the dirt inside this massive stone bowl, and the contents are shocking. I mean, I assume they would find a skeleton, maybe laid in a fetal position to fit the curve of the rock.
That would be the logical guess.
But that is not what was inside. They found a dense, chaotic concentration of human bones belonging to at least 37 different individuals. Wait, did they literally cram 37 intact bodies into a 2-meter-wide jar?
No. Not at all. There simply isn't enough volumetric space for 37 fully fleshed adult and child bodies in there.
So how did they know there were 37 people?
We know there were at least 37 individuals, primarily because the osteologists counted the most durable parts of the human body, the teeth.
Oh, right.
The demographics of those teeth show a massive range, from young children around a year and a half old all the way up to older adults. But the bones themselves were jumbled, not articulated.
Okay, articulated meaning the bones were no longer connected by the ligaments and tendons.
Precisely. If you bury a fresh body, the skeleton stays in its natural anatomical shape as the soft tissue decays. The spine stays lined up, the femur stays seated in the pelvis.
Right, like a Halloween skeleton.
Right. But inside Jar 1, the bones were entirely disarticulated. This tells us we are looking at a secondary interment.
Secondary interment, meaning they were moved.
Yes. The individuals were not placed in Jar 1 shortly after death. The bodies were allowed to decompose somewhere else entirely. In fact, just 500 meters away, researchers found a group of 7 smaller, empty jars they designated as Group 2. It is highly probable those smaller jars functioned as primary containers where the messy initial biological decomposition took place.
Think about that for a second. To you and me, modern Western burial practices are entirely designed around preservation.
Yeah, we fight decay.
Exactly. We use chemical embalming, heavy sealed caskets, concrete vaults. We view decay as the ultimate enemy to be delayed at all costs. Why would this ancient culture intentionally distill a loved one down to beat bones before putting them in the giant jar?
It reveals a profound philosophical difference in how they conceptualize death. To them, decay wasn't the enemy. It was the mechanism of transition.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Jar 1 wasn't a grave meant for a single tragic event. It was an ossuary, a permanent family crypt. Secondary interment signifies a multi-generational system of ancestor worship.
So they were constantly interacting with it.
Yes. The dead were not buried and forgotten. By reducing the physical body to clean bone, you transition the individual from a decaying, polluted corpse into a purified, permanent ancestor who can safely join the collective family inside this monumental stone vault.
That completely reframes the landscape. It's not a sprawling cemetery of lonely graves. It's a neighborhood of permanent family vaults.
Exactly.
And the bones they pulled out of the dirt tell us intensely specific things about how these people lived. The researchers found evidence of something called tooth ablation.
Yes, the dental findings were remarkable.
They were intentionally removing perfectly healthy teeth, specifically the upper or lower incisors. Why would anyone do prehistoric amateur dentistry on healthy teeth?
Well, ritual tooth ablation is a well-documented cultural practice across prehistoric Southeast Asia. You see it particularly in areas of modern-day Vietnam and Cambodia.
What?
It is usually performed during adolescence as a rite of passage. It acts as a marker of entering adulthood or a permanent visual sign of belonging to a specific tribe or clan. It is a way of physically marking the body to show group identity.
That makes sense. They also noted a 5.3% rate of cavities or carious lesions in the teeth, Now, 5.3% might just sound like a random statistic to most people.
Right, but it's crucial.
My understanding is that it's a huge clue about what they're eating. How do we get from a cavity to a medieval diet?
Well, cavities are essentially the fossilized fingerprints of diet. A 5.3% rate is highly consistent with agricultural populations relying heavily on starchy foods.
Like potatoes.
In this region, specifically things like sticky rice or taro, which are indigenous, the mechanism is simple biology. When you chew starchy foods, enzymes in your saliva break those complex carbohydrates down into simple sugars.
And then the bacteria go to work.
Exactly. The naturally occurring bacteria in your mouth feed on those sugars and excrete acid as a byproduct. Over time, that acid eats away the tooth enamel, creating a cavity.
So those tiny holes in the teeth confirm these people were settled agriculturalists, farming the valleys below the jar sites?
Yes, they weren't just nomadic hunter-gatherers.
The researchers also noted something incredibly poetic about how the bones were arranged. It wasn't just a random dumping ground.
No, there was a clear spatial organization.
Right. While most of the arm and leg bones were bundled together in the center of the jar, the skulls and mandibles, the jaw bones, were found closely grouped near the outer edges.
It's fascinating.
It paints such a vivid, almost cinematic picture of the ritual. Someone walking that 500-meter path from the decomposition jar, carrying the cleaned bones of their grandfather, and carefully arranging his skull along the perimeter of the stone, so he is looking inward at the rest of his family.
It really highlights a deep, ongoing intimacy with the dead. They were handling these remains with intense, specific care.
Okay, so you have this incredibly specific, sacred ritual dedicated to ancestral purity. But they weren't just putting bones in there. They were burying earthly objects with them. When the team sifted the sediment, what else did they find?
The burial goods are where the local story becomes a global one. Alongside the human remains, they found a surprisingly diverse collection of artifacts.
What kind of artifacts?
Well, there was an iron knife, a small copper-based bell, and several earthenware pots. Some of these pots were globular, with flared rims and a dark black slipper glaze, while others were thick-walled, footed bowls.
Which is fascinating, but the real showstoppers, the things that completely blow up our understanding of these people, were the beads.
Oh, absolutely.
Sifting through the dirt, they found 20 tiny glass beads. To figure out where these glass beads came from, the researchers used a technique called laser ablation. How does shooting a microscopic piece of glass with a laser tell us its origin story?
Laser ablation mass spectrometry is an incredible forensic tool. Essentially, researchers take a microscopic, highly focused laser and zap a tiny, almost invisible fraction of the bead surface.
Like just vaporizing a piece of it.
Exactly. That laser energy vaporizes the glass into a tiny plume of gas. That gas is then sucked into a mass spectrometer, which analyzes the exact atomic makeup of the vapor.
Wow, so you can see every single element inside it.
Right. Every region in the ancient world used a slightly different recipe of sand, ash, and minerals to make glass. The mass spectrometer gives you a highly specific chemical fingerprint that you can match to known ancient glass-making centers.
And that chemical fingerprint is where this deep dive goes global. Because they tested 12 of the 20 beads to avoid redundancy. And 9 of them were made of a mineral soda-high alumina glass.
Yes, a very specific type.
That highly specific chemical recipe points directly to manufacturing sites in South India.
And it gets even more astonishing. 2 of the beads were made from soda plant ash glass.
Plant ash?
Yeah. The chemical signature of using that specific type of burned desert plant ash to flux the glass originates in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq or Syria.
Stop and think about that geography for a second. We are talking about the remote, mountainous jungle highlands of northern Laos, and inside a stone family crypt, we are finding glass that was melted and shaped in Mesopotamia.
It is truly mind-boggling.
Furthermore, they found one dark blue bead that was potash-rich.
All right, potash refers to potassium-rich salts derived from burning specific types of local hardwood trees.
And a potash-rich glass signature points to manufacturing in southern China or northern Vietnam, right?
Exactly. But what's crucial is that this blue bead was chemically much older than the others. It wasn't a recent purchase. It was a curated heirloom, passed down through generations before finally being deposited in jar 1.
Finding an Iraqi bead in a Laotian mountain jar feels like opening a sealed tomb in the Scottish Highlands and finding a Mayan jade carving. I mean, here's where it gets really interesting. How does a fragile glass bead travel 4,000 miles across deserts, oceans, and mountains 1,000 years ago?
through an immense cascading network of intermediaries.
Yep.
No single merchant was walking from Baghdad to Laos.
Right, that would be impossible.
The bead would have been traded along the maritime Silk Road, passing from Arab dhows in the Indian Ocean to South Indian port cities, then carried across the Bay of Bengal to the coasts of Southeast Asia.
And then making its way inland.
Exactly. River merchants would trade it upstream until it finally reached the highland trails. This discovery forces us to abandon the idea that the communities building the Plain of Jars were isolated hill tribes.
They were super connected.
They were strategically positioned at nodal points along massive overland trade routes. They were actively acquiring luxury goods from the other side of the known world to honor their ancestors.
Which brings us to the biggest revelation of the entire paper, the timeline. We've established what was happening, these elaborate secondary burials, and we know they were connected to a massive global trade network.
Yes.
But knowing exactly when this happened has been the holy grail of Southeast Asian archaeology.
For decades, scholars looked at the sheer megalithic scale of the stone jars and assumed they dated back to the Southeast Asian Iron Age, roughly 500 BC to 8500.
Just because they looked so ancient.
Basically, yeah.
Oh.
The assumption was that this was a deeply prehistoric ancient phenomenon that existed long before the famous empires of the region rose to power.
But science doesn't rely on assumptions. You can't radiocarbon date a carved stone. Rock doesn't contain organic carbon that decays at a measurable rate.
No, unfortunately not.
But you can date the organic material buried inside it. The team took 8 different samples of human bone and teeth from inside jar 1, plus fragments of charcoal from the soil directly surrounding the jar, and ran them through the radiocarbon lab.
And the dates completely overturned the Iron Age theory.
Completely. The results were definitive. Jar 1 was actively used between the 9th and 12th centuries AD. Specifically, the calibrated dates range from the year 890 to 1160.
And the spread of those dates across the different bones is just as important as the era itself.
Because it wasn't all at once.
Right. It proves this wasn't a single mass burial event, like a response to a plague or a battle. The continuous spread of radiocarbon dates shows the jar was actively managed, opened, added to, and closed for up to 270 years.
So we're not talking about 500 BC. We are talking about the turn of the first millennium, the Middle Ages. While the Vikings are sailing longships and the First Crusade is happening in Europe, the people of the Plain of Jars are flourishing.
It perfectly shifts our perspective.
This timeline perfectly aligns with an era of booming trans-Asian connectivity. You have the massive commercial expansion of China's Song dynasty to the north. You have the zenith of Cambodia's Khmer Empire, the people who built the spectacular temples of Angkor Wat to the south, and the Dali Kingdom in nearby Yunnan.
The entire region was pulsating with economic and cultural activity. The people of the Plain of Jars weren't a forgotten relic. They were right in the middle of this medieval boom, flexing their wealth and honoring their ancestors with imported South Indian glass.
But this timeline creates a massive logical puzzle. If the bones date to the 9th century, does that mean these 9th century people actually carved the 2-ton stone jars? Or is it possible they just moved into an ancient abandoned graveyard? Like, did they just start using Iron Age jars for their own medieval rituals?
This raises an important question, and it is the exact debate currently electrifying the anthropological community.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because we still cannot directly date the moment the stone was carved. Some researchers strongly argue for the reuse theory. They believe an Iron Age population carved the landscape, vanished, and the 9th century people merely repurposed it.
Okay, that makes sense. But what do the authors of this study think?
Well, the authors of this antiquity paper argue that the overwhelming preponderance of evidence firmly plants the actual creation and thriving use of this mortuary culture in the 9th to 12th century. They point to the radiocarbon dates of the bones, the chemical age of the glass beads, and the specific stylistic designs of the earthen pottery.
And then sometime after the 12th century, the timeline just goes cold. Nobody added any more bones to jar 1. The trade goods stopped flowing. The great stone vessels were eventually swallowed by the jungle and the mist.
It's quite dramatic.
Why did a 270-year-old family tradition suddenly vanish?
The most likely explanation isn't a catastrophic collapse, but a profound cultural and religious shift. This period marks the widespread expansion of Buddhism into the region. Buddhism brought entirely new theological concepts regarding the soul and the body, along with new mortuary practices, specifically cremation. The multi-generational stone ossuary, with its focus on preserving the physical bones of ancestors, simply fell out of religious favor. The culture adapted to new beliefs.
It is incredible to zoom out and look at what this single stone jar tells us. History is never a static, dusty textbook. The Plain of Jars shows us that even the most remote corners of the globe were pulsating with trade, with shared beliefs, and with a deeply universal human desire to honor our ancestors across generations.
It really is a beautiful thought.
It's a powerful reminder to you, our listener, of how fiercely interconnected the human story has always been. You can be standing on a misty, landmine-scarred mountain in Laos, holding a glass bead forged in the deserts of Iraq, honoring a grandmother whose bones have finally come to rest alongside her descendants.
It bridges the vast macroeconomics of the medieval Silk Road with the intimate, deeply personal reality of a family grieving and honoring their dead.
But I want to leave you with one final lingering mystery straight from the source material to mull over. Anthropologist Miriam Stark, who reviewed this incredible research, pointed out a glaring, almost haunting absence in all of this data.
Yes, a huge open question.
We have mapped 120 sites filled with thousands of their massive stone jars. We have the bones of their children and elders. We have the beads they traded for with Mesopotamia. But archaeologists have never found the settlements where these people actually lived.
It is a profound blind spot in the archaeological record. We have their elaborate, monumental cities of the dead, but their cities of the living remain completely invisible to us.
Where did the creators of the Plain of Jars go at the end of the day? Where were the homes of the people who dragged those 2-ton stones up the mountain? That is a mystery for you to explore on your own, but it makes you wonder. Maybe when we finally find where they lived, we'll realize that the architectural logic we've been looking for all along was right there, waiting for us to understand it. We just have to keep digging in the mist.